Hello, everyone. Welcome to another podcast from hockeyprospect.com. I'm Jérôme Bérubé. I'm joined by my good buddy, Brad Allen. Hey, Brad.
Hey, Jérôme, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. So this is our second podcast we're recording. A few days ago, we did the goalie podcast that is now available on our YouTube channel. So everyone, if you want to know about every single goalies that are in the book. You can check our podcast. We go through, I believe, 18 goalies. We also do like a recap of last year's goalie class. So check it out. Give us a subscribe. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. It's gonna help us grow the YouTube channel, and it's something next year we're really excited. We want to do a lot more of those next year during the season, not just at the end. So we're pretty pumped for doing more videos like this next season. And also our black book is now available. It's been uh, it's been on our website since last week. I honestly, the reviews, the feedbacks we have received, Brad, have been really awesome. We put a lot of work. We always joke like we bleed for this book. So the feedbacks we've been getting since last Monday have been really awesome, and it's pretty cool to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. We won't get everything right, but it's we our opinion is our own, and I think that's important. And we actually really do pay out of our own pockets, travel everywhere. We do what we can, and I think that definitely matters too. It's very difficult to have the staff that actually gets to most international tournaments and gets to see everything locally, and we do our best. I mean, there's a lot of nights where you know, not as much this season, but a lot in the past where, Mark would be calling me at 3 a.m. to stay awake at the wheel coming from Kingston, right? And his home's in Oakville. So, yeah, definitely a lot of long road trips. Yeah, definitely a frequent flyer this year. Some late, long traveling. And yeah, it was really cold in Finland. I ain't gonna lie, I was not used to it. It was damp. It went right through my bones. My Swedish colleagues were laughing and joking as they ran around in their t-shirts, and I was in basically a parka. But yeah, it was it was a good time. It's a great time with the U18s. It's fun to travel.
Yeah. You have to be really passionate about this business because it's a tough one. So today's podcast is about our top 32 rankings. So we're gonna go through our top 32 rankings that is free. So if you guys want to follow along, you can go on hockeyprospect.com. The rankings are you just have to click rankings and on the home page, and it's right there. Just before we get going, I just want to give a shout out to our scouts, our scouting staff. That without them, there's no black book, there's no rankings, there's nothing, right? So obviously, Mark Edwards, the big boss. I've been working with Mark for so many years. I feel like he knows me inside out. I know him inside out. We know each other really well, and always fun to work with Mark. And so without Mark, obviously, there's no hockeyprospect.com. He's the one who created back this back in 2004. So again, without Mark, there's none of this that you're watching today. Does not exist. Other scouts: Mike Farkas, Tim Archambault, J. Brad Johnston, Joel Collette, and Dustin Braxma. Again, without them, we can cover every single player by like one person cannot single-handedly scout this draft. So uh, everyone has a value at hockeyprospect.com, and without them, there's no book. Like me and Brad we have no interest in writing a book by ourselves. So this is a team effort, and without those guys, there's none of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Our staff is super, super important. We are reducing the book next year, just because admittedly, like it's just the workload's unbelievable, and we're trying to work on a lot of other things as well that are going to be hopefully very exciting in the future. And I'll be talking more about that in a bit. But yeah, the book still exists. It's just we're going to shave it down a little bit and be able to allow new things to materialize, like a podcast that's actually full time, which Jérôme was discussing. So we're going to have a lot of new things coming for you guys next year.
Yeah. So just a reminder, you can get the black book on our website if you want a PDF version, instant download. And if you want a print version, if you're Canadian, it's on Amazon Canada. If you're American, Amazon USA. And Amazon obviously is pretty quick to get you the book. Anyway, we're gonna get going with our top 32. So we're gonna do this podcast in the two part. We're gonna do the second half of the first round into this video, and we're gonna do another video finishing off the top 16. So let's start with number 32, Sam O'Reilly of the OHL champion London Knights. O'Reilly's been the guy that's been very we have had some really good debate among around his name this year, because he didn't really do a whole lot for us in the first half. We thought he's a character player, but maybe the skating, the skill level is a bit too low to really care for him like really high in the draft. But it's also a guy that really improved in the second half of the year, had like also a really good playoff run with the Knights. I think we project him as probably a third line player, can play center, can play right wing. He's a hard worker. I wouldn't say he's a very I don't know if tenacious is the right. He's tenacious, but he's not someone that is really annoying to play against. So that is if you compare, let's say, to Easton Cowan last year, Easton Cowan was just he could drive people nuts a bit. Probably not the same thing with O'Reilly. But that's a guy that really, like I said, really improved in the second half of the year. The skating, the skill level got a bit better. This are also still a bit of things that he has to work on for before reaching the NHL. So like we mentioned, we have a staff. We have, I think me, Brad, were a bit lower on him than Mark. Mark really likes this player, and that's perfectly normal. Having a staff, having different opinion, we don't always agree 100% with each other. But Mark was really pushing for O'Reilly in the last few weeks before like the leading up to the final rankings meeting. And to his credit, Mark was the guy really pushing for Easton Cowan last year, and he got so far. I think he got it right. So I think O'Reilly is again more of a third line player, good character. Like he's just a hockey player. I know some people don't like when we say just a hockey player, but that's the reality. He has different layers to his game. He can help a team different. He can bring some offense. He plays good defense. He's a hard worker. Again, maybe he has enough offense to be a PP2 guy at the NHL level. We'll see about that. But he can really be a good penalty killer. So again, there's a reason why we have to watch those players all the time and not just watch him in November and say, well, that's what he is. Like players change, and a scout opinion needs to change if the players change, and we need to watch those players a lot to really get a full story on that player. Brad, I don't know if you want to mention a thing or two about O'Reilly.
Well, I'll start with what you just mentioned about watching games. So I saw a comment on HF boards in our forum, and one of them was like, "How many viewings do you get essentially?" And the answer is our staff gets a ton, live viewings and through video. We do use both full games and shift by shift through video. But for instance, between Jérôme, Mark Edwards, and myself, there's some players we've watched 70 times. Legitimately, and if you extend that to some of our area scouts, it actually goes further than that. We watch a ton of these players to try to get it right most of the time. Sometimes it's not possible because you find a player later in the season, and it's like, oh, this looks like a player, but we are legitimately out of time. That happened with Riker Evans, something I'll never live down. So there are occasional examples where, yeah, we don't have the games, but this player is not one of them. He's a London Knight. Mark Edwards seen him a ton live. Knows what he's like off the ice. And yeah, to Jerome's point, we came around on him later in the season. When it comes to what he is, one of the most interesting discussions I think surrounding him isn't who he is as a player. It's just the philosophy of where he's ranked. So, for instance, for some of you who are unfamiliar with how we rank, when you see top 32, you might assume that that means first round. That's not the case. We attempt to do a team list as an NHL team would. So we simulate what would be like on national draft floor. And what that means is the 32nd pick in our draft is actually towards the middle to late area of the second round. It is not a first round pick. This is a second rounder to us. So this is a B-rated prospect. Now, what's interesting is when you look at these players that are middle of the second, late second, what you're really trying to get is a player that's actually going to play over a minimum of 200 games and above replacement level. And the argument with Sam O'Reilly that we've had on our staff, and the argument that I'm sure has been made across the league, is there enough viable offense to actually hit a third line projection? One thing that we look at in order for that to occur is you look at the playmaking ability, you break down the shooting quality, you break down the skating base, the handling, and what you see is that Sam O'Reilly, his A to B skating is good, but the mechanics are not very good. And what this means is that when he is attempting to handle at his top speed, he can have his handling rates break down a little bit. What it also means is that when he's attempting to set up his plays, he's off balance. This decreases the efficiency and potential point projection of the player. Then you look at his shooting ability, and realistically, his shot quality is not that great. He's not a high-end shooter. So what you need is to see that workhorse mentality and anticipation of the play in advance so he can get to those high-danger areas still and get to rebound secondary shooting and scoring opportunities, net front to be more of a dirty goal scorer, which he definitely projects to be. So we think it just passes that minimum threshold needed to hit the third line projection of maybe a 25, 30 point player that can help insulate a line, Swiss Army knife style hybrid center, who already is showing more than we expected to be in this season. So it made no mistake. If it was not a London Knight, I think this would be a bit of a different discussion, but we definitely take systems into consideration, as do NHL teams. So if you see, for instance, in this case, the London Knights, that's one of the top organizations in the CHL. That really matters for us when it comes to determining where to put a player on a list, because we know the development's going to go well.
Yeah. Also, when you have a guy that you really trust his compete level, his work ethic, those are the guys you want to bet on that are going to get better. If someone is lazy or whatever, like obviously you're not going to rank that guy in the first round unless he's an elite talent and you kind of bet that he's going to figure it out. But those guys like O'Reilly that, are high compete guy, like those usually are the guys that are going to figure it out down the road and get better. And, he does need to get better, but the improvement level that we saw in the second half of the year, it's a really good thing for him, and it's very like positive as far as like his value in the draft goes, and his draft stock going up. At 31, we have one of Brad's favorite player, Jesse Pulkkinen. Brad, I'll let you go with him. I know you have a lot to say about Jesse Pulkkinen.
So he was my first player I actually scouted this season by accident. I was watching Emil Hemming, and Emil Hemming actually turned the player inside. He turned Pulkkinen inside out, and it was a JYP system. I was like, I don't remember a 6'6" defenseman that looks like this in their system. Who is this? So I went and looked him up, and it turned out to be Jesse Pulkkinen. He was a +1. He was not his first year of eligibility, but the first thing that stood out was the toolkit. Even though he got folded inside out by Hemming's hands, he was still 6'6" and getting off the center line well. And that's obviously, from a scouting perspective, definitely need to know who that is. Jesse Pulkkinen is one of the boomer bust prospects in this class. I don't think to me, it's either he's not in the league or he's a bona fide unicorn that you never trade. Right? To me, that's what he. Now there are definitely a spectrum of opinions on this. I'm definitely bullish on him relative to most of our staff. With Jesse Pulkkinen, you can't teach what he has, right? 6'6", incredibly talented for his size. It's not Elmer Soderblom level of handling ability or coordination at his age, and he doesn't have the shooting mechanics of Tage Thompson at his age. But when you look at him and compare him to some of the other bigger D like Marc-Edouard Vlasic, he's, I'd say, ahead of Vlasic in Vlasic's plus when it comes to handling, coordination, and shooting. And for some of you, I know you've seen the progress of Marc-Edouard Vlasic. He's had a tremendous season with Chicago this past year. So very different games, but when it comes to coordination, it shows how gifted Pulkkinen truly is. When it comes to the skating base, excellent open ice skater, I would argue, relative to his size. And the reason I say that is when you look at bigger defensemen, the first thing that has to translate is the skating, because usually the bigger they are, the more sluggish they are, the worse they are getting off their center line. Then they're going to be getting folded inside out against agile, very nifty, crafty skaters who can run through them essentially. But Pulkkinen's not that. He can really get up to speed quickly. He has a deeper stride than expected. It's not like perfect. It's not 90 degrees parallel to the floor type of thing where you're looking at perfect mechanics, but it's very good. And when you look at the fact that he's still only 19 years of age and he's 6'6", he's growing into his frame, by the time he hits 23 and 24, then I think the depth is actually going to get really, really good. Why that matters for defensemen is that when you have somebody who's huge, 6'6", like Anton Saleyev, like Jesse Pulkkinen, the lower that they can get within their depth to the ice, the faster that they can take away passing lanes, and the faster they can recover. The rate of recovery increases as a result of the depth within their skating. So that's where Pulkkinen not only has theoretical advantages, he already showed them. So when you look at him transferring from J20 to Liga, and you look at him from his development curve perspective defensively, he was, in my first feelings, getting folded and flipped inside out by Emil Hemming. Towards the end of the season in Liga, he was closing correctly. His gaps were better. He was understanding how to anticipate play better along the boards at a better rate, close off on players so they ran out of space quicker. And then when you take in consideration his frame and range, he started actually understanding how to use his frame to his advantage so he could bully smaller forwards. And that was, again, against men. So super positive curve when it came to the defensive play. It's still not going to be the standout quality, but it's much improved and had to be. The other aspect of this player is that he's gifted with his retrievals. He has excellent hands, again, the frame, skating ability, but he also has first phase deception. What that means is that when he's under pressure and there's a forecheck, he's going to be able to scan the ice correctly, look at options, know what's coming at him, and then try to use his handling, his off looks, and his hesitation feints to manipulate the opposing forecheck, so it buys him extra time and space. However, if he has no time or space, regardless of using his deception in his hands, he has to fall back with the frame. He can absorb contact. He can use his range to extend the puck length, and then that creates additional options. So that's extremely important for his game. And that brings me to the most important aspect of his game, and that's his offensive transition game. This is a player who can skate the puck and he can handle it at a high speed, but he also showed the ability to start stretch playmaking on the weak side options through layered traffic as the season progressed. That's super important for his development, because this is admittedly a player who's super raw, who overhandles the puck and overpossesses the puck. He's not a player who knows how to manage the puck correctly. And this goes back to one of the most important and misunderstood aspects of defensemen, which is rate of risk, and risk mitigation. Now, what's really convoluted about risk is it changes depending on which zone they're in. So I'll try to make this quick and generalized, but when it comes to risk in the defensive zone, you're talking about how they close on a player. If they close on a player on the wrong angle and you're dealing with a theoretically gifted skater, it means they're going to get burned. So they have to be able to close on angles that allow them opportunity to recover if necessary, but also close off the ice. So it allows them to control the geography of the rink. It's a term I borrow for Teddy Atlas when he discusses boxing. It's all about controlling the geography of the ring. Well, in this case, with defensemen and risk mitigation, it's about controlling the geography of the rink. Then you look at it from an offensive perspective in transition. So when he's transitioning through the neutral zone, he used to be have that forward instinct mentality where he didn't recognize the numbers game. You need to play the numbers game correctly in order to transition up the ice at the rate necessary. He would be all over the map with that, but however, you put him in a more structured environment in Liga, and then it started improving a lot, right? So it was much better. Again, it's all about that curve. The curve kept improving repeatedly, and that's what allowed him an opportunity to really showcase his offensive skill set, which is where we get the offensive line and the power play quarterbacking upside. This is a very gifted shooter from the back end with excellent shot quality. He is exceptional at breaking on the first layer of traffic. However, once you get past the first layer, that's where, again, risk comes into play, his offensive risk. He would overhandle pucks. He would mismanage possession. He wouldn't incorporate his teammates at the rate necessary. So there is risk that's identified through all three zones. And that risk, depending on the scout and how they evaluate that risk, are going to have very different projections, evaluations of this player. Because of the curve, I felt very comfortable. I think Jesse Pulkkinen has a tremendous amount of potential, but he plays the game largely by himself at times, and that has to change in a massive way if he's going to actually translate into a top four defenseman. However, he does have fallbacks. If his offensive game doesn't translate to the degree we think it does, there is potential for insulation because he is a 6'6" defenseman who can skate and has range. And he showed at the end of the year a much more physical game. So the unicorn, he is a unicorn. He is one of the unicorns of this draft, one of the best development curves I've ever seen if you took him from last season and then actually valued him at the end of this season in Liga. And that really matters. It's one of those situations where we always discuss the development curves. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Steve Ballmer from Microsoft when he had that famous speech where he ran around the stage screaming development, 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 development. And he just did it for like 5 minutes straight. And everybody was, what's he doing? Well, I would do the same thing if I could. If I was given a spotlight, I would just be yelling development curve, development curve, development curve when discussing and evaluating prospects and how to figure out which ones are actually going to manage to make it relative to those that can't. So that's a bit about Jesse Pulkkinen's game. Tremendously interesting player. In terms of like players in this whole class where I'm like, I really want to know where that player goes the most, he's right up there. I have no idea where he goes. I think he might get aggressively drafted here. He could be the first overager since I think Tanner Pearson to go in the first round. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that I remember Tanner going as an overager in the first was LA. So it's possible, but we think more likely second round and probably somewhere actually where we have him, which is 31st slot.
Yeah. I just want to add about him. Like you mentioned, the offense is like a really strong part of his game, power play. And then, in the biggest showcase he had this year, the U20 in December or January, didn't get a single shift on the power play. So, it's funny sometimes how coach are going to use some of those draft eligible prospects. Maybe it's a level of trust that the Finland coach didn't have in him because he's not someone that was really well known. Like he was a nobody last year. But it's pretty interesting. And, if he becomes what we think he could become, it's going to look a bit, stupid to not have him play on the power play that in his draft year. But it is what it is. Like you said, I think he's first round. I think we would be really happy if he goes in the first round, but I think it's more of a safe bet that he goes in the second round, probably mid second round, maybe. I think that's a safe projection to make. At number 30, we have Sacha Boisvert of Muskegon in the USHL. I think we all pretty much agreed on him on our staff, like a pretty easy player to scout. I remember after the Fall Classic, Mike Farkas, who was our US scout, was like, I don't mind this player, but he's not a center. That was like the first thing he said to me during the season. So he played center all year, but Mike and all of us, I think we don't project him as a center for the next level. Reason why I think the vision is lacking a bit. The playmaking skill is not it's not there for us. But that doesn't mean he can't be a good player at the NHL level. I think he's one player who can score because he's got a really good shot. He can score from distance, which not many players in this draft can actually score from distance. So he's got that tool, that shooting skill that can translate at the next level. And also, he's one of the best compete guy in this draft. He fought a few times this year, like a really good, honestly, pretty surprising, but a pretty good fighter. So I'm sure NHL team were really enjoying that part of his game. So and he's physical, like he competes hard, he hits guys. So you're looking at more of a, I don't think we like his shot, but we feel more it's like more of a turn line, maybe middle six role for him at the NHL level. Not a clear cut top six forward because the playmaking, the IQ is a bit lacking here, but the tools with his shot and his hands and his physicality does give him pretty good value. He's off to North Dakota, which is a pretty good hockey school in the NCAA. He's raw physically, so he's going to be able to gain some, add some master his frame, get stronger. Like he should play around 6'2", 200 pounds in a few years. He's far from that now, so it gives him more time to get bigger, get stronger, and with that, the skating, which is average, if he gets stronger, maybe the skating can get to another level in a few years. So he's an interesting player. I think in the last third of the first round, we have him 30, which means technically that's a second round value for us. But in the actual draft, I think there's a pretty good chance he goes in the top 32. Brad?
Yeah, I'd say his if we're wrong and say theoretically ends up a top six forward, it's because the growth rate is surpassed what we see. Right. And that's possible. This player is very, very raw physically, as Jérôme mentioned. This happens. I remember Maxim Groshev was a Russian player who was, 6'2", excellent frame, could skate like the wind, but the handling was raw, right? Mechanically very raw. You look at him in the offseason, 4 months of development, his hands were twice as good. And that's with Boisvert. Same thing. Can the hands? One thing with Boisvert that's very interesting to contrast with his teammate Matvei Gridin. Matvei Gridin's entry rates with his handling was he would only attempt them at 1/4 the amount that Boisvert would, but his handling rates in terms of effectiveness was way way higher, and that tells you Boisvert much more experimental with his handling, much more willing to engage in open ice with his handling in transition, and his error rate was much higher. Which again, it goes back to that raw mechanics. So there was a lot of flaws within his game. But then you look at the shot, you look at the size, as Jerome mentioned, the willingness to drop the gloves to support his teammates, the physicality. There's a lot of fallback options within his game. So it's a home run for a team if he ends up a 25, 30 goal scorer, which when you look at his shooting mechanics, is theoretically possible, right? But then there's the fallback if it's not there. And when you're at this stage in the draft, and we're talking 30th, so again, mid-second round pick, if you can get a very useful third line player that's willing to play playoff hockey and do things the right way, that's considered a home run pick, right? And I know for some of you, you're probably saying, well, it's not a high enough upside. This is probably the biggest difference between online scouting and trying to evaluate this as an NHL staff would. You have to take risk into consideration in a draft, not just with player evaluations like I mentioned with Pulkkinen, where you break down risk in each zone. You actually have to do it from draft perspective. And so for one example of this, the LA Kings, when they had the 3 first-round picks a couple of years ago, right, they attempted to solidify their draft early with Alex Turcotte, which unfortunately hasn't happened. It tells you how difficult this job is. A lot of people, including us, missed on Turcotte. And then as they had Turcotte, they took another, what they felt was a solidified defenseman. And the Swedish defense, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was another player
Tobias Bjornfort.
There it is, Tobias Bjornfot. And because they had those two players that they thought were very high floor, what did they do? They went and swung. They swung with everything they had at the top of the second. So that's how you run a draft, right? It's you have to make sure that these first 2 round picks actually end up something. And if you're going to take a chance, a massive gamble, you have to make sure your draft is already solidified. So Boisvert is one of those draft solidifiers for a team where it's okay. We definitely think we have something that will play, and there is potential for more.
Moving on to number 29 on the list, and we're going to go with Nathan Villeneuve of the Sudbury Wolves of the OHL. A bit of a surprise ranking, I think. If you look at like different lists out there, like Villeneuve is not anywhere on some lists, and we really like his game. There's no major stopper in his skill set. His brain, his hockey brain, his compete level is excellent. Skating is really good. So we really like this player. Like he's not, we don't think of him as a top six guy, but we really think that kid will play. And it's a bit hard to explain why he's not list elsewhere. But I mean, for us, we just love the player. He can play center, he can play wing. He's a really good skater. The skill level is good enough, I think, to be a third line player. Um, a bit underrated, I find. Like some of his playmaking sometimes this year was like, wow, okay. Maybe even better than I thought at some point. Still some inconsistency with his playmaking, but the good viewing of his playmaking were really good. So that gave you an idea of like this kid is he's not just like a annoying player to play against. Dub and chase and go hit the guy in the corner. Like that's just like he can do that, but he has underrated skill. And the fact with sub rate this year, it took him a while to really play. Like most of the first half, he was on the third line playing 12, 13 minutes a night. And he finally got a chance to play top six in the second half of the year, and he took advantage of it. Again, we don't think he's a top six guy, but you need guys like Nathan Villeneuve on your team, on your third line. Again, he can play center, he can play wing. He's going to be a really good penalty killer. He's got the speed, the compete, the effort level away from the puck is really good. So he does bring like a very good different layers to his game, which some guys that are maybe more talented will score more than him, but his value will be higher for his team that draft him because he can do a lot of different things on the ice. So again, he's a player that we like. We don't expect him to go where we rank him, but we feel, I think, confident he's going to go somewhere in the second round. Brad, what was your maybe your view on him this season?
Yeah, it was surprising. You look at his production. I think that's one of the reasons that people aren't as high on him as we are. He doesn't have great production, right? Not the most productive player. Not used a lot though. I think that's something that needs to be mentioned is that this was a player that we used in the utility role. He didn't get a ton of minutes. Not put into a position to succeed at the rate he probably should have. But when you look at it, he's a super pest, incredibly powerful open ice skater, very good mechanically, as Jerome mentioned, like the playmaking rates, like when you see his best playmaking performances, he's doing everything right. He's the tempo control is there. He understands the rhythm and flow of transition. He knows when to stop up. He knows how to readjust his lanes within his skating. He understands how to offlook his options. He has a very soft catch release as well. So when you take into spatial awareness and combine it with his power skating, he can get into space and he can easily box you 15, 20, I think, in terms with his catch release and just his net front and willingness to get to the dirty areas. So there's a whole lot here. We live on an island with this player, but I mean, we talked about with goalies, we live on an island in this draft, really. Like we see a lot of players differently than a lot of people. We think this draft in general is deeper. That's what they maybe we should have started off talking about. We think this draft's actually pretty good. A lot of people don't. I remember Todd Button, director of scouting for Calgary, came out recently discussing how he thought it was a deeper class than some people thought. So it's nice to see someone in the industry back that point. I've been making it for a long time this season, and there's just a whole lot of depth. It's just awkward depth, meaning like a lot of these kids don't project to really be able to like pop off into a top six role or a top four defensive role or become a true number one starter in net. But there's a ton of interesting talent that if it develops properly, it can give you more than you think, and that's exactly what Nathan Villeneuve falls into. That's the category he falls into, and that's why we have him as high as we do.
Yeah, you mentioned the depth of this draft. Like I think we mentioned during the goalie podcast, but it's a very last year's draft. Everyone thought this was like the best draft of all time, but the draft last year didn't really have much depth. Like some
No.
teams were running out of players in round six. I don't think it's gonna happen this year. Um, I think that the team list this year will be a lot different than last year. I feel like last year a lot of teams had the same list, like not the exact same list, obviously, but very similar. Usually it's
Similar
very
tiering, yeah.
different. Yeah. Um, so and this year's like to compare the top end of this draft not as good as last year. Obviously, the top end last year was really strong. I would say the top 15 last year was really good, and then it just I don't want to see collapse, but it really dropped after that top 13, top 15 range. But this year the depth is pretty good, so um, I I don't know if we're alone in taking this, but probably the case. Um, at 29, sorry, 28, we have Andrew Basha of the Medicine Hat Tigers. That's a guy we really like early on in the year. Obviously, he was playing with Caden Lindstrom, but we really like his game in the first half of the year. A bit fall off a bit in the second half, but obviously he lost his center for the full second half of the year, so that's a bit tough. And I think Brad, you might mention that, but they also tried him at center at some point in the second half of the year. So his second half was not as good, but he's a guy who has a high level of talent, good hands, a good playmaker, good decent to above average shooting abilities. Plays with good pace. There's a lot to like here. It just maybe the second half of the season left us wondering a bit about him. That's why he did drop a bit on our final list. But overall, I think he's a guy that has a lot to offer to an NHL team come June.
Yeah, absolutely. This player for me, one of the big things. So he's a new age prototype, right? Let's start there. Is neutral zone entry rates per 60. They're going to be high. He can really handle a puck. He can hit through that neutral zone. Kind of like Nikita Grabenkin, I would say it's kind of similar how they operate through the neutral zone. Grabenkin's bigger, but similar. But this player can really help his team in a ton of ways. One, playmaking upside. It makes his teammates better. He can really operate from the wall when he's flying down a wing, operate from the wall, find something, find stretch weak side options, find high danger options quickly. But then he has that motor that you look for. There's just a tremendous amount of energy that this kid brings to the table. So it's one of those situations where sometimes we compare players to like the equivalent of like a Red Bull. Like that's what this player reminds me of. He's got the wings. His ability to just generate energy for his team is extremely important. And then again, playmaking options, so he makes his teammates better in that way. And then he's a pressure generator. He's not the biggest kid, not the strongest kid, but he generates pressure, and that leads to turnovers. So from those perspectives, he can make his team better. I wish he was more inside driven occasionally. I feel in our viewings a little more mixed. Sometimes he'd be a little more perimeter than you would want, especially when his confidence was waning. But that's not so dissimilar to any player. Usually, if their confidence isn't in the right spot, then they're not going to attempt to drive inside as often as you like to see. So that's an area of its game where I think it can go up another notch. Also, not the most gifted shooter. This isn't going to be a high end finisher, but the way that we look at it is, potentially 15, 20 goal, and 30, 35 a point producer who isn't going to hurt you defensively and is really going to bring a ton of energy and a ton of value in the neutral zone. So, and he's a power play weapon for sure. At least power play two. I think if he really develops even at power play one. So yeah, really impressive player. Obviously, he's one of the older players in this class, and normally like it's not that big a deal. There's all sorts. Austin Matthews, one of the oldest players in his draft. Brady Tkachuk was really old for his class too. It doesn't matter for everybody. However, this is the youngest class that can ever remember scouting. So it's like it really stands out when you have an older player, and Andrew Bash is one of them. So maybe a little less in terms of the growth rate relative to say Sacha Boisvert as an example. But yeah, really like him. I think we have him, and I hope we have him in the right spot. And I won't be shocked though. Won't be shocked if this player actually goes to the end of the first round. Won't be shocked if he ends up in that 25-32 slot.
Yeah. The next guy on our list is Alfons Freij from Sweden. Um, I will argue he's one of the top skater in this whole draft class. Decent size, not a huge guy, but not a small guy either. Really, the first thing you notice obviously is the skating. How smooth, how explosive he can be on the ice. He has some, I think, underrated skill. Like I think we saw a bit of that at the U18. Like he went end to end a few times with the puck, and he flashed some really good hands, one on one. He's a guy who can score from the point. Also, he's got a pretty good shot as well. Um, I think the biggest question mark we had with him was probably defending and the physicality. But I think late in the year and also at the U18, he started showing a bit more pushback in his game, which that's everything for us. That's something we wanted to see more out of him this year. But I think what he showed late in the year in tough, important matchup, I think that was you know pretty pretty good to see out of him. So just to see more pushback, and I think defensively he's fine. Is he ever going to be an elite shutdown guy? Maybe, maybe not. I think one of my friend, like he does compare him to Gustav Forsling of the Panthers, which is, hey, if he's Gustav Forsling, I think we have him way too low on the list, because Gustav Forsling is pretty dynamic, like pretty damn good with the Panthers in the playoff. So we'll see, but this is like one of the best pure athlete in this class. Very good at athletic ability. Obviously, the skating is elite. So he's a player we like. Um, and it's funny, like he plays on his local team with Leo Walden Salinius, which is often ranked above him. And for us, it's a bit of I think it's closer now. I think Walden Salinius made some good progress for us, but we still just like Frey more because the skating is that much better. And we see, he's more of an athlete and more of an athlete for us than Salinius. So, Brad, what was your maybe your take on him?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to contrast him with Wallenius a little bit. So Wallenius more poised, more intelligent, thinks 2, 3 steps ahead at a higher rate than Frey. But Frey's the one with the crazy toolkit, and as a result, has a recovery base that Wallenius just will never have. So Wallenius's margin for error is a lot lower than Frey's, and that's because Frey can just constantly recover if he makes mistakes. However, Wallenius' entire game is based off of his hockey stance because he doesn't make that many mistakes, where Frey obviously can. I would say one of the more interesting aspects of this player, he reminds me a lot of Elias Salomonsson from the line, meaning that they are shoot first defensemen as opposed to defensemen who look to break down the first layer and then set up playmaking options. They actually both have tunnel vision, which is not usually what you typically see with defensemen. Carter Yakimchuk is a high end example of this. Which it's not a bad thing if you can really shoot a puck, right? You want somebody to shoot. Sam Dickinson is also falls in this category. There's a couple of them this year. Frey is probably the third on that list. Well, it certainly is to us and probably most staff. But that doesn't mean that's not useful. You still want a quarterback option that can really run a power play by bombing pucks from the point. Alfons Freij projects to be able to do that because when you look at the playmaking and how he incorporates it into his shot, he can perform brilliant lateral cutbacks, give himself so much separating space, and just be able to reorganize, redistribute the puck through lanes in terms of his shooting. So really interesting player. I wish he was a bit smarter in terms of how he managed possession after beating the first layer, after pinching in the offensive zone. But he's still going to end up with a lot of primary assists just based off of his shot getting trickling, hitting off of posts and or not posts, but hitting off of pads, hitting off of legs, any sort of chaotic situation, which allows him an opportunity to get those secondary and primary assists. The other thing I'll mention is that in terms of his neutral zone, one difference between him and Salomonsson is that Salomonsson never used first phase deception despite being one of the best skaters in the class. What that means is that he was overusing his skating and not having fallback options that would theoretically allow him to project correctly. He has since fixed that since he's entered Skellefteå at the SHL and is in the SHL environment. He has worked on that, and it shows. However, with Freij, he already shows the off look in first phase deception that you look for, despite having those elite skating mechanics. That is an excellent sign. The other thing is that when he's at his top speed, his processing ability held, at least at the J20 level, where if somebody was running right at him and he was flying at them, he would be able to get the puck off his stick in time before taking contact a lot of the time. So that's really important for us when it comes to determining if a transitional, really a puck moving transitional player with a great shot can translate. And he showed that he could do those things. And Jérôme's credit and point, he did show a little bit of pushback, which was definitely the biggest problem with this player defensively. Most players that we like defensively fall into the category of being mean or hard to play against. That is not Alfons Freij's game. It's all about the skating and the stick, right? So if he can continue to learn to adapt a little bit more sandpaper, a little bit more grit, that will go a huge way for him having a fallback option if things don't go his way developmentally in terms of becoming a top 4 defenseman, which we think he could become.
All right, at 26, we have, speaking of sandpaper, Yegor Surin out of Loko in the Russia Junior League. I don't know what's up with Loko, but I've been a huge fan of their teams the past 2 years. Discovered Surin last year while scouting Dmitry Simachev and Daniel Butte, and he was really good as a 16 years old in that league. Very physical. That was one thing I noticed. I was like, man, he was not a big kid. Back then he was about 5'10", but he was easily the most physical player on the ice. And that continued this year. So he last year mostly played on the wing. This year mostly play at center. I think the biggest question mark we have with him is like, where is that playmaking going to be at the NHL level? If his playmaking is really more consistent, I think he has a chance to be a center. At this point, we're not overly confident this is going to happen, but we have seen it. We have seen it in the past that this can improve. Best example I can give is JJ Peterka. His draft year, his playmaking was not that good. A good reason why he went in the second round instead of the first round. And then a year later, his playmaking was fabulous. And he's making regret a lot of teams not picking him in the first round. So Surin, we saw some good flash of the playmaking, but it was really up and down most of the season. But overall, I think the skill level is good. I think he's a perfect player that you can play anywhere in your lineup, in your top 9, center, left wing, right wing, doesn't matter. He can play. And if he's more consistent with his playmaking and his skill level, I think you might get a top 6 player out of him. He plays a style that is really built for playoff hockey. He's one of the more tenacious, aggressive, borderline dirty player in this draft class. There's not many players like him. Also, one thing about him, he was 5'10" last year. Now he's listed at 6'1", so very impressive. Growth. Is he really 6'1"? Well, I believe more 6 feet, but it doesn't really matter if he's 6 feet or 6'1" because he's really strong on his skate. He doesn't lose a lot of one-on-one battles. He's very advanced physically. So there's a lot to like with this player. If you watch an NHL playoff, it's like, man, you want that guy on somewhere on your top 9. So whether the offense is really clear top 6 or not, you're getting a really good value with that player. If he's there late in the first round, like in the last third of the first round, I think he's a really good pick for any team drafting him. So Brad, what was your maybe your opinion on him this season? Because we've gone back and forth on him all year because his season was really up and down, but the high was really good.
Well, I remember when we first evaluated him, there was off switches. He was inconsistent even just with his compete. It wasn't emotion as often as we needed. He was kind of caught flat-footed a lot. He seemed disinterested at times. Body language wasn't great. He scored what 3 goals in the first 20 games. So we were very confused on what we were watching in terms of because coming in the season, we had high expectations. Um, this is very much a prototypical Russian forward, meaning he doesn't know how to fit into a system yet. He tries to do too much by himself. He tries to run over teams using. He's a very powerful kid, so fair play to him. I mean, he is trying to use his strengths to his advantage at times. He's one of those raging bull style. He sees red. He sees red a lot. He goes after players. He tries to compete and attempt one-on-one handling plays at way too high a rate right now. He has tunnel vision. Certainly doesn't know how to incorporate his teammates at the right time as often as we would typically like. However, as Jérôme mentioned with JJ Peterka, there's tons of examples where when you get kids out of one system and then put them in another system that promotes more of a structured environment, then they start opening up their playmaking ability. We've seen it time and time again. It's not that this kid can't make high-end passing plays. It's just that right now he's choosing not to. He's choosing to try to do too much by himself. He needs to give himself breathing room. He's just inexperienced with how he needs to actually play at the NHL level. The other factor, which is super important for this player, is that he is one of the youngest players in the draft. He's also one of the most physically developed. So that's very intriguing to me because, normally if you see somebody who's this physically developed, like this kid's super powerful. Like he can launch players over the glass. This kid's really, really strong. But he's that young. That indicates to me, from a strength and conditioning perspective, somebody who's naturally a very, very, very strong kid. Meaning like you squat, bench, like any sort of normal metric. I bet you he would do them I bet you he would do really well at the combine. Let's put it that way. He would do really well. To Jerome's point, in terms of his height, very difficult to evaluate because he does skate over the top of himself at times. So he makes himself look shorter than he actually is. So when he's actually standing upright tall, he looks maybe 6'1", but when he's skating, he looks 6 feet. So let's say somewhere in the middle. However, again, super young. If he can get to 6'2" or 6'3", oh, then it's really on because the type of game he plays is just so heavy. He projects to play weighted minutes in the playoffs, meaning he's going to drain opposing defense. That's super important when it comes to overtime hockey because if you have a defense that's drained, it means that they are more error prone. If they're more error prone, they're going to make mistakes that lead your team to getting more opportunities. So that's an aspect of his game that's basically the fallback when he's not scoring. Speaking to his scoring, fantastic set of hands, knows how to manipulate a defensive triangle to get his shot through, has tremendous shot quality, projects to, I think, probably be a power play weapon if things go really right. And if not, then as Jérôme mentioned, I think the fallback is probably third line. I'll say this, out of all the players we've discussed so far, if I was a betting man and I was saying which player actually ends up making that jump to maybe a top six capacity as a role player within the top six, I really think Yegor Surin probably fits that description, and that's one of the reasons we have him ranked where we do. I would argue he's one of the most underrated players in this entire class. You don't see him ranked that high on lists or anything. What do you put up? 50 points in 40 games. He's an August birthday. He plays a power game. Incredibly tenacious. Drops the gloves at a moment's notice. There's a whole lot of good. Whole lot of good. And I guarantee you this. I guarantee our listeners this. He will go a lot higher in the actual draft than what you see perceived publicly. Teams do not ever discount this type of player. You must get them. They're incredibly hard to find. He produced at a high rate. As long as the interviews go well and everything checks out, he's going to go very high in this class.
Yeah, he also had a great playoff run with his team, brought them all the way to the final. They lost against Ivan Demidov and his team. So really, really good performance by him in the playoff. The next guy, another Russian, but one that plays in America with Muskegon, Matvei Gridin. So this was a player that man, the conversation we had about him were all year were like very, very a very frustrating player to watch because the talent level is obvious. One he was, I believe, the USHL leading scorer this season, which doesn't happen often for a 17 years old player in that league. And he was very dynamic in the second half of the season. Very, we love the talent, we love the shooting ability, we love the hands, we love the playmaking. There's a lot to like here. But the compete was just I mean, I can speak for myself. He just drove me crazy with his compete, his body language. You know, sometimes that puck would be in the corner and it's right next to him, and he would try to tell his teammate, "Go get the puck." So, just like a lot of things like this, or just like quitting on play sometime. Um, but to be fair, like things got better with that in the second half of the season. This is something that was like talked about with teams also. He's well aware of that. So Brad, you talk about um, maybe Pulkkinen being a boom bust type of prospect in our top 32. I feel Gridin is the same. Terrific talent, but if the compete, the body language doesn't get fixed, or it doesn't get better. He got better a bit in the second half of the season, but I want to see more of that. Um, you know, Time might you know stop him from playing it in the NHL, but the talent is there. So if he can, figure it out, um, a way to improve his compete, his body language, um, he could, make a team really happy if they pick him in the second half of the first round. Maybe not even the first round. Maybe he drops all the way to the second round. Who knows? But there's a lot to like here skill wise. The big question mark we have is the compete, the body language, and that's what we're gonna watch next year. He's supposed to play at Michigan University next year. We'll see if he goes there, but that would be a good place to see his progression next year on a top college program.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Matvei, I'm totally with you, Jérôme. Like, a lot of these players we talked about have fallback options. They could maybe fit a further depth role if things don't go right. Matvei Gridin definitely does not fit that description. I'm sure for some of you listening, it's like we're talking a whole lot about like how fighting's important and how hitting rates are important and how players have to be tenacious. The truth is, when it comes to hit rates, they always go up in the playoffs for a reason. It's incredibly important to hit correctly at the right times because it can disorient and disrupt a team. If you hit the right player at the right time in the right spot, you can completely change the momentum of a game. I think one of the best examples of this I mean, I was going to say recent history, but wow, does time fly, is when Alex Ovechkin leveled Jaromir Jagr in open ice. Jaromir Jagr was a man possessed that game. Ovechkin got him right at the right time, and Yager's game was suppressed from that point on, and it made a massive difference in momentum. People forget, like, hockey is a game of momentum swings. It's all about an energy balance. When you smoke a player that's on the opposite team that matters at the right time, that doesn't just disrupt or that player that it was hit. It also gives your teammates a massive boost, right? It creates a more there's more of an energetic response to the result of it. So I know for some of you, it's like, this is sounding really old school. And don't get me wrong, what we try to do is blend both because both are correct. You need new school, so you need neutral zone entry rate players who are fast, nimble, tremendous skill level. They don't always have to hit. They don't always have to drop the gloves. They don't always have to. They don't have to have the highest level of compete if they're super talented. You'd love to see it, but they don't have to have it. But in the case of this player specifically, the reason we bring it up is because we missed on Dominic Bach. Straight up missed. He absolutely we bombed on him. Some of you were asking about our misses. Well, here you go. Here's one of them, Dominic Bach. And their games, admittedly, there are some scary similarities. Both tremendously talented. The hands on Gridin are super efficient. They were super efficient on Dominic Bach. Their forechecking was an embarrassment at times. You were there left screaming asking for more, asking for just the most basic type of forecheck, the most basic type of response to try to retrieve a puck correctly, win a loose puck battle. It's just these things really do matter for translation rates. Like Dominic Bach is one of the most gifted players we've seen in the last 7-8 years. and he's not in the NHL, and it has nothing to do with the talent. It has everything to do with the determination, the will, the willingness to to put his body on the line to get pucks back. That was not present at all. Matvei Gridin has been super inconsistent with that, even though it improved a little bit as the season progressed. So yeah, Matvei Gridin, very much boomer bust. Has also this as well. Michael Farkas, one of our staff members, he was the most bullish I've ever seen anybody on Shane Pinto. There's been a home run hit for him. This is the most bullish prospect I've seen Mike Farkas rank in a long time. So that maybe this is another add to Farkas's list of resume of players that really are going to work out for him. But yeah, super talented, dual threat. When he's on his game, he really makes it look easy. It's almost like to a fault. Sometimes it's just like effortless how easy he makes things look offensively, where it's for some of these kids it's second nature at times. For him, it's not. Right. And that really screams to his top six offensive upside.
Yeah, and funny enough, we're going from a player that we have question mark about his compete to the guy who has probably the best compete, in the whole draft, Stian Solberg, a favorite of me and Brad. So he's number 24. Just had a great, World Championship in where was this tournament? In Czechia. So we love this player. I think I mentioned my comps for this player was Alex Romanov way back in September. I think he showed in the second half that the poise, he's got a bit more better poise, better puck skills than Romanov at the same time, at the same age. So we like this player. Like, is he going to be a popular guy? No, not really. Not really his game. I think he defends really well. He's physical. You have to be aware of him on the ice because he can catch you with your head down. I think more like in the Norway league, you would see player have the puck and they would, on purpose go the different way. If Solberg was on the left side, they would try to enter the zone on the right side of the ice, and that's what happens when you have a bit of a headhunter or a guy who can really catch you, a la Darius Kasparidis, or Romanov is a bit like that, or for Montreal fans, Alexei Emelin was like that too in his NHL days. So, but the biggest thing about Solberg to me is like how much he improved in the second half of the season with his puck skills, because we did have some question mark with that during the year, the first half. So there were some good, some bad, some good, some bad plays from him with the puck. I think it got better in the second half, and he was really impressive with the puck at the World Championship against the biggest competition he faced all year. This is a kid like 18 years old that play in the Norway, number one league, but this is not a league that really players get drafted out of. Usually you see kids from Norway going to Sweden. He last year he decided to stay one more year in Norway. He pretty much bet on himself that he was going to be good enough, and with the international tournament that he would be good enough. Maybe I don't know if he thought he was going to be a first round pick, but at least a top 2 round guys come for the NHL draft. So lots to like with this player. Me and Brad we had some really big debate with Mark about Solberg. I might have thrown my phone on my couch a few times because I was mad. But that's part of the scouting process, Not everyone has to agree with your opinion, but it's really good debate. So Brad, I know you were a big fan. You mentioned it to me you mentioned Solberg to me last year in April 2023. You saw him live at the U18 last year. So you're the first human that I've known that was on board with the Stian Solberg hype train. So tell our listener what your take on Stian.
Well, the second I saw him and I thought he was really good, I started asking a couple of scouts around me what they thought, and the vast majority said they didn't even notice. All right, so it's like either they didn't, they didn't want to tell me, or they really weren't. Now it was against the program, so most teams are watching the program as for their due diligence, obviously. But Solberg held against the program mentally. He showed poise. Showed the ability to stretch play make, and that was against the best team at the U18s last season. So it was one of those situations where I was very, very interested in seeing his development. I was hoping he'd come to the CHL. He didn't. That made our life a lot more difficult because Norwegian pro hockey is not that good, to put it mildly. The reason it's more difficult for us, especially evaluating defensive talent, that's another thing. It's much easier to develop to evaluate forward talent in these bottom tier pro leagues relative to defensive talent. And the reason why is because you can have your entire evaluation right about a player, but if the retrieval rates are incorrect, you can destroy your entire process. It can take out your whole projection of the player. And that's I bring up the retrieval rates because in the first half of the year, super inconsistent. Didn't even matter if he had pressure, if he didn't have pressure, he'd throw pucks into no one. He didn't have any sort of game plan. He wasn't thinking 2, 3 steps ahead. He wasn't anticipating correctly. He was just all over the map, essentially. He was just kind of winging it. And it was one of those situations where I was confused because I liked him seeing how poised and calculated he was in the U18s against the program, and now he's not that, right? So it was strange. And then to what Jérôme mentioned with the handling rates, when he was trying to transition to the neutral zone, his hands would shut down on him, and he did not project to look like anything that would resemble a quarterback in the power play. That said, I remember we had this discussion, Jérôme. I told you I went back and kept watching, and towards the Norwegian playoffs, he started turning a corner. It's like it really reminded me of when Elias Pettersson had that 30 game funk. I'm sure some of our listeners or Vancouver fans remember this. Pettersson was playing like the worst hockey of his career. This was like a couple of years ago now. First 35 games, he looked like a shell of himself, and his confidence was shot. And then the second half, he had that massive boom, and his confidence was back. Looked like a completely different player with his handling rates, his offense, transition, everything changed. Stian Solberg had that. Stian Solberg went from like kind of not confident, not really knowing what he wanted to do at times to the puck, and then the lights went on and he figured it out. And then you just saw this confident transitional rush machine. He was going through all three zones. He scored a beautiful goal in the playoffs, actually, off of a three-zone rush. And he started showing the capacity to actually use his skill set at the offensive line because he is a very, very gifted athlete. If athletically speaking, he's right there with Alfons Freij in terms of his skating base. They're both very gifted athletic skaters. And so what that means is he could use his skating, break down the first layer, and then what we're seeing is that his good shooting mechanics. He also can offlook and find high danger lateral options. And we saw this before the World 18, before the World Championships. And so I remember telling Jérôme our hope was that he wouldn't play and we could hide him, right? And that was the hope. He'd be hidden because people misinterpreted this player. And unfortunately, he shows up to the Worlds, and the rest is history. He was outstanding in some of those games, especially when you look at relative to the expectation of him coming in. But it wasn't just the World Championships. I've seen that written a lot, like, oh, he was amazing at the Worlds, but otherwise, that's not the case. We've watched him the entire season. I've seen over 30 games of this player. It's towards the playoffs and then directly in the Norwegian playoffs. Then he carried that over to the Worlds. That's the difference. He was very good in some of the Norwegian playoffs. The big thing with this kid is that when you look at his risk evaluations, not great. They aren't as bad as Jesse Pulkkinen's, but they fall like you're going to have a similar discussion as a staff about them. But his rate of recovery is phenomenal, much like it is for Alfons Freij or Sam Dickinson or any of these elite skating defensemen. And that really matters for him because he will occasionally cough up really bad turnovers. Like he's going to put pucks right where you don't want him to put them. But then the rate of recovery, the competitive nature of the player, some of the best hit rates in this class. And he also, with his athletic base, with his skating base, actually projects to be able to hold in a top four capacity when it comes to dealing with the trend, very good transition puck rushing forwards. So when you look at like the highest end of that, McDavid, McKinnon, he projects to potentially be an insulator and be able to handle them to a degree. And that really matters. So not the craziest offensive ceiling, probably a 25, 30-point defenseman, not a power play guy, but it's impossible to find these types of players mentally. Like his mentality is it reminds me a little bit of Martin Ferravari. or it's do or die, whatever it takes. That's his mentality out on the ice. Very hard to find these types of players psychologically. You take that into that 6'2" athletic skating base, you take the curve, you take the fact that he's mechanically a gifted shooter, has off looks, he can set up lateral options, he improves a ton, and I would be extremely surprised if he's not a first round pick.
Yeah, and I'll say this: I'm pretty biased with anyone that throws reverse hit. He's the king of the reverse hit in this draft
This
class. So very like Peter Forsberg like reverse hit potential with him. Really fun player to watch. I think he's I would say he's one of the safest players in this class. I think worst case he's a third pairing defenseman, tough to play against. But the more season progressed, the more we saw, hey, this kid has a chance to be a top 4D. And I've heard, oh, he didn't play well at the U20 in December, and I'm like, really? I completely disagree with this. I mean, I didn't think he played great, but I thought the first 3 games of the tournament he was really good. Played a lot of minutes. His play, fell off after the last 3 games, and I think that's what mostly people are talking about. But I thought in the first 3 games, even the game against the American, I thought he was really good. So he's a player we like. I think unfortunately for us, he had to play one last tournament, and he was in our first round all year. Nobody has him. Nobody really talked too much about him during the season. So unfortunately, one more tournament and everyone jump on board on the Stian Solberg hype train. But hey, that's scouting. People will figure it out at some point. Um, and but yeah, he's going to be a first rounder come June 27. Next guy on the list at number 23 is Marek Vanacker of Brentford of the OHL. So that's a player that Marquette was mentioned to me really early in the year. He said, watch this guy. He's like, I just saw him live one game. He was really good. So really, really early on, he was on the hockey prospect radar. But unfortunately, I felt like the first half of the season was a bit up and down with him. There's some good, some lesser good moment from him, but I really think he took like his game to another level in the second half of the year. I believe he had 48 points in the second half of the year, which on the full season that's 96 points. That's a lot of points for a draft eligible player. And you have to remember, like on his team, his center was a 16 years old center. He played with Jake O'Brien, who was really, really, really good, but still a 16 years old kid. So we like this player. We think has a chance to be a top 6, if not middle 6, third line player. I think the two-way game is solid. Some physicality with him, some kind of like old school grinding hockey out of him. He's currently injured, by the way. He got hurt late in the playoff, so but he's going to be fine for next year. The skating is that I think the skating is probably the part of his game that needs a bit more work, but it's good enough for us because obviously we rank him 23rd. If we really didn't like his skating, he wouldn't be 23rd on our list. So we like this player. I think he does. I personally like players that have different layers. They can do a bunch of different things on the ice that can make them successful and can help them reach the NHL. Like he's not a one-dimensional, scoring forward. He does bring a ton of different, element to his game. So Brad, what was your maybe your take on him? I know we watched him a few times together this season. So what was your take on him?
Well, he reminds me of a new age prototype type of power forward in the sense like, everybody wants a north south power forward that's just going to cut and use their frame and create havoc, right? That's and with good reason. That's extremely effective, right? But he's new age in the sense that he's very creative and he can operate east-west as well as north-south. And so there's a fallback option in terms of how he attacks and what plane he attacks on. And then he's very creative with his playmaking. Like this is a player who does hesitation, reverse spinning passes. He's not afraid to try really unique passing plays down low. It's one of those situations where, admittedly, some of it, he's got to learn how to reduce risk on his playmaking, and sometimes he throws pucks away, and there's some of that, and it's frustrating. But at the same time, he's a power forward who's trying to experiment and trying to be a dual threat. And if you can get an experimental, creative dual threat power forward who plays a hybrid east-west game, north-south game, I mean, that's extremely, extremely useful if it hits. Speaking to what you mentioned, I think I totally agree with this, that like the biggest issue with this game is definitely his skating mechanics. And I think for our listeners, I won't go into too much detail, but I will say this. I know for some of you are going to say, well, skating is what's the most correct, right? You're going to hear that. That's not always true. What it is, it's you break down each player's components from a mechanical perspective. Some of it's fixable, some of it isn't, depending on what it is. So, for instance, knock-knee syndrome, depending on the severity of it, it can be not fixable or it can be, right? So it gets very convoluted, very, very, there's a lot of gray here. When it comes to ankle eversion, that's more fixable because it's more usually a strength issue, right? Or knock-knee syndrome is not, it's more of a structural issue. And so what you're looking at with Marek Vanacker is his hip line is very tight. It's rigid. Mechanically, there's not a lot of hip rotation. So when it comes to his crossover mechanics, when it comes to his ability to turn using his hip line and to gain momentum quickly, it's not really there. He's really fighting through his stride. Now, it's not the same as if he was like theoretically strapping a piano onto his back and he's just can't get going and there's just no power. That's not the case. It's just more of mechanical inefficiency as a result of a hip line that doesn't help his cause. Can hip lines get corrected? Again, it depends. It's all about if he can increase his range of motion, his flexibility within his hip girdle. And sometimes players can do that, and sometimes they can't. And so skating is a lot more tricky than people think. It's not so okay. Well, this guy A to B is good, therefore he's fine. Or it's not so much, well, this kid is mechanically gifted, but then there's no power, so it doesn't matter. There's just so much more to it than that. And with Vanacker, it's definitely a talking point, and it could be the difference between him being a top six forward and a top nine forward. It really could be a difference, and it's very difficult to evaluate with him specifically, to be honest. But yeah, we really like him. I think there's definitely potential for at least like a second line role if things go really well. And to Jérôme's point, like you look at the second half surge, it was a real surge. It was something we actually did project. And we get very comfortable with players if we look at them early and say, hang on, the points should come. And then they do. That's a great sign, right? And that's what we're looking for. And that's what happened with Vanacker.
Yeah. Moving on to number 22, we have Julius Miettinen from Everett of the WHL, originally obviously from Finland. Again, another proof that you need to keep watching those players because I watched this player last year at the U17. He's okay. Watching him at the Olympics this year, he was okay. First few months in the WHL this season, it was just okay. And then maybe it's me. Maybe it took me a while to figure his game out, or maybe he just got better in the second half. I think he did get better in the second half of the season. But second half of the season, start making a lot more plays, start making more of an impact on the game. So Miettinen is a 6'3" center, really smart, good compete. Skating is fine. It's not fantastic, obviously, but it's fine to me. He's really good around the net. That's his bread and butter. His play around the net. Really good end in tight. Works hard. Will take the punishment in front of the net. He's not selfish. Plays hard. Watching him this year, I just had this vision in my head because a few years ago, I remember scouting Joel Eriksson Ek out of Sweden, and I saw a lot of similar skill set between the two of them. Some different. Like I think Miettinen is a better skater at the same age. I think the playmaking is a bit better. And back then I thought Eriksson Ek third line center was my projection, and my projection for Miettinen was also a third line center. But then, you look at how good Eriksson Ek has been in the NHL. He's a true number two center. You could argue he could be a 1B center at this point. Score over 30 goals. And I'm like, well, I don't want to close my mind on Miettinen becoming a 2C. I think, Brad, you mentioned it to me first. And at first I was like, I don't know. And then I thought of Eriksson Ek in my head. I'm like, well, if Eriksson Ek can achieve that, I can't close my mind on Mason and achieving that. So I think they're pretty similar. I think there's some argument among your staff about the actual skill level of Mason, but again, to me, he's a player with. I mentioned this often already, but he has so many layers to his game. Like someone like maybe Basha might score more goals than him. But I still think Mason will have more value at the NHL level because one, he's a center. Two, he's got great size. I think his game will work well come playoff time. And that's a guy who can play a lot of minutes for you. 5-on-5. I think he can be an asset on the power play in front of the net, either PP1 or PP2. I think he's going to be a really good PK guy. So he does a whole lot of different things for you, and I think NHL coach are really going to love that player. I mentioned Joel Eriksson Ek. Some people mention Lars Eller as a comps, and that can work too if the offense really does not translate as a top two line upside. So we'll see, but I really think this is a player that's going to play a lot of season in the NHL, and whoever coaching will really love having him on his team. Brad, what was your take here?
Yeah, so I'm sure for some of you listening, it's like, why him over Sacha Boisvert? Why is he this highly ranked? Because we really think he's actually a center. That's the big thing. For Sacha Boisvert, he might be a center, but we much more think of him as a hybrid winger, right? So Miettinen, true center, one of the best curves in this class. So the first 5, 6 games I saw of Miettinen, he was behind the play, he was caught out of position, he was up and down in terms of everything, in terms of just his handling was too raw. He was inconsistent with his passing execution. He wasn't scoring. He looked not disinterested, but I would say not as involved or dialed in as you typically want to see when it comes to a player you really care about. And I'll be honest, I really didn't think much of him. I thought Miettinen's fine. It looked to me middle round pick, not one that I was super high on. And then towards the latter half of the year, I mean, he finished 10 in his last 10 games. He had 7 points, right? And leading up to that, it was already before the production came. The everything was going right already. So started playing above the puck, started really commanding a 200-foot game. As Jérôme mentioned, there's a tremendous amount of potential down low for him, where he's in net fronts, almost like Thomas Holmstrom type of presence down low, very good instincts down low. He's also got a bit of Soderblom in him, where he's very creative, uses a lot of between the legs handling plays to manipulate opposing defenses, goalies, and giving him a different range of options. He's also a player who understands how to use double hesitation rockbacks and knows how to like thread passes through triangles. He can make high danger lateral setups off the rush. He started improving a lot off the rush as well, just in general. That's a huge thing for him, where he was having a lot more difficulty with that in the first half of the season. I didn't have the greatest playoffs. I wish he was a bit better in the playoffs. But again, it's one of those things where if he was really good in the playoffs, maybe it's a Stian Solberg situation. We lose him entirely publicly, right? So I can't always want these things to materialize. So Miettinen, for my money, most untapped potential at the center position. And I think the team that gets him realistically might have a second line center if things go really right. And to Jerome's point, I think Eriksson Ek's an excellent comparison when it comes to that. Eriksson Ek, honest, hardworking game. And I think most people in the industry saw him as more of a third line center, but he's certainly not that now. Everything's gone right for Eriksson Ek, and he certainly had some qualities that Miettinen possesses. I would argue he's more consistent competitively, and just more naturally consistent with the playing in a structure. Where Miettinen is more of an experimental style right now, but that's okay, right? It's different curves for different players. So we think this kid has tremendous potential, really do. We think he's just getting started, just scratching the surface. And for my money, the dark horse of this class in terms of the center ice position.
Yeah. At 21, we have Cole Beaudoin of the Barrie Colts of the OHL, one of the more physical player in his draft class. We know he's a gym rat, just a physical beast on the ice. Really loved playing a physical game. Like he hits hard, plays the right way. He's a center now, probably going to be a winger at the NHL level. Well, he still could be a center, but the skating will be the key element here to follow in the next few years. How much the skating get better, but when you watch him, like he doesn't lose a lot of puck race. Like he people might be hard on the skating, but he doesn't lose a lot of puck race. He's always pushed on the puck. So there's a lot to like here. I mean, is he going to be a true top six forward? I mean, unlikely, but you can't say like it's not impossible. I was watching NHL playoff this year in the first round. I was watching Adam Lowry of Winnipeg, and I was at the same time the U18 was happening, and I was watching Beaudoin, and I'm like, obviously Beaudoin is not 6'6" like Lowry, but come playoff, like you want a guy like that on your team, whether he's at center or on the wing. Like he's as a defenseman, you don't really like playing against a guy like Beaudoin. Not only is he gonna try to hit you every single time you have the puck, but in front of the net, he's really tough to move. He's so strong physically. Again, he's one of the more fit player in this draft. Did fantastic at the combine. Again, plays the right way. He's not just a physical specimen. He thinks the game well. Really underrated playmaking from him. That playmaking, if we're right, and that could help him play higher in a lineup that maybe some people think. Is he gonna score a lot of goals? Probably not, but just he makes player around him better. Obviously he creates space with his physicality, but he can feed the puck pretty well. So that gives him more chance to be a center. If the playmaking was not good, we would probably tell you guys that this guy is going to be a winger, a bit like we did with Sacha Boisvert. But the playmaking is much better than Boisvert, so he does have a chance to stay down the middle. And yeah, he's our 21st ranked player. He's our first B if we look at our grade. I think this is a guy that's gonna go probably higher than people think. I think I'd be shocked if he doesn't go in the top 25, in my opinion. And there's a lot to like here, Brad.
Yeah, I'll quickly say like this is another skating mechanic situation. The Boone Jenner comp. I mean, it makes a lot of sense because in Boone Jenner's draft season, skating was a major issue there too. So with Beaudoin, upright skater, so posture is lacking. Doesn't have good stride depth whatsoever. And one of the major reasons for that is he is a wide track skater. Now, I say that term again, skating being so convoluted because Maxime Groshev, I mentioned earlier, he's also a wide track skater. He's one of the best open ice skaters you'll ever see. So there's a huge difference there. Both are wide track, but Groshev's doesn't work to his disadvantage with his frame, where Beaudoin's does. So Beaudoin, it's almost like Logan Stankoven. Logan Stankoven, A to B is fine. One of the ugliest skaters that's ever walked this earth, right? So, and yes, I know our listeners. Yes, we put him too low, and yes, one of the reasons was he's too ugly a skater for us to put him as high as we should have. And so Beaudoin, we're trying to right our wrongs, right? And one of those things is, okay, he's an ugly skater. Bobby Brake's an ugly skater. We have Bobby Brake ranked high. Why not just give the kid benefit of the doubt? So Boisvert's never going to be a fluid or efficient or good-looking skater. But if you're not going to be that, be ultra competitive and make sure your conditioning is incredible so it makes up for your lack of efficiency in your skating base. That is 100% what he'll be, because to my knowledge, he has never eaten a chip in his life, so he'll be fine. He's a specimen. The kid's got a good head on his shoulders. He knows what he has to do.
Yeah. Moving on to number 20, out of Prince George of the WHL, Terik Parascak. So that was a guy that was quite interesting because he didn't play in the WHL last year. Came in, nobody really knew much about him, and the first 2-3 weeks of the WHL, I believe he was leading the league in scoring, and that was, I think he was a bit of the talk of the scouting industry in September, October. Very smart player. Plays well inside. Not a huge guy. The skating is a bit ugly, but it's fine. So as a scout, I think we like to find comparables of players. So that makes it a bit easy to first talk about that player and compare. So my first comparable for him was Tyler Toffoli, and looking back, it probably doesn't work super well with him, like because there's some different element here. Parascak, like Toffoli, really smart. Both guys are a bit of a. Their skating is a bit ugly. Like it's not pretty if you watch them skate, but they get from point A to point B fine. But they're so smart that they know where to go on the ice. I think two different things here. Toffoli has a much better shot than Parascak, so that's why that comes. It works, but it doesn't work at the same time. So the shooting is very different. I think Parascak needs to be closer to the net to score goals. Meanwhile, Toffoli can score from distance, pretty easily, as he showed at the NHL level in the past 10 years. Compete level, we were talking with Mark about this, and he knows, Toffoli well. I mean, I believe he coached him in some maybe summer hockey or anyway. He knew him well, and he said, Parascak competes is much better than Toffoli was in junior. In junior. So that's a bit why Toffoli didn't go in the first round in his draft year. The skating was a question mark. And the compete also, like it was not bad, but it was not like a high end compete. Parascak is a high end compete guy. The skating is okay, but we think it's going to be good enough with the NHL with times. So that's the two big difference between those two players. The shooting abilities is very different, and the compete level is very different. But when I watched Parascak, I just had that fully, vibe watching him just because similar size, skating is a bit ugly, but just finds a way to get the job done. And Mark also mentioned in one of our meetings that there's some Ryan O'Reilly with him. O'Reilly again, not a good skater, obviously, but high compete, very high level of intelligence. So it's always hard to find the perfect comparable for players. Sometimes it's really easy. Like Stian Solberg, Alex Romanov for me came like this. For Parascak was a bit tougher to find one. I think Andrew Basha was another guy. Brad, you and I were discussing all year, like finding a comps for him, and I don't think we found one for Basha anyway. So, but for Parascak, we like to play over 100 points this season. There's some element of his game that me personally I would, on my personal list, he's a bit lower than what we have, but I can appreciate what Mark was his biggest, backer in our meetings. As far as like hockey sense and compete, and that's the two category that we, put more focus on. So very interesting player. He's one that I'm really interested to see where he goes in the draft. Um, very, very interesting player to follow come June 27, where he goes.
Yeah, this player does not fit like a new age model, right? You're always looking for elite skating, transitional zone entry machines who are prototypical line drivers, instinctual line drivers who can dominate possession and who make their teammates better and drive play. That's not what this player is at all. He's not that. He can make his teammates better, but the rest ain't there. He did not project to have good neutral zone entry rates. Not going to be a transitional force, and he is not going to be driving possession. So why do we have him as high as we do? I should also argue, you make a huge argument that his production is also inflated. He was playing on a tremendous team, had talent all around him. He's put in every position to succeed. So it's like, okay, why do we still have him this high? The reason is because although it's a subtle quality, it's an incredibly rare quality, and it still allows him to theoretically able to actually translate his game to the NHL. And that has to do with his spatial recognition, his spatial awareness. This is one of the smartest players off the puck in this draft. He is remarkable at finding the right ice at the right time to get the right setup by his teammates so that he can either shoot a puck or use his processing ability, which he has, to one-touch pucks to his teammates, set up give-and-go sequences where he can then become the finishing option. So it's everybody wants that, again, the fast driving neutral zone entry machine. Everybody wants that McDavid, McKinnon style of player, that Matt Barzal style of player. However, that doesn't mean you can't have a Terik Parascak on your team. Can you build a team around them? Absolutely not. No. The answer is no. He's a complementary piece. But can you have one in your top nine? And can that help you come playoff time? The answer is absolutely yes. So it comes down to drafting philosophy. It comes down to team composition, what his team already has. And admittedly, this is a player where you typically don't look at him that high up in a class, but he does have an elite trait. And that elite trait is unteachable. You cannot teach spatial awareness to a kid. He's either elite spatially and he's elite with his timing, he's elite at processing what's around him, or he's not, and he has that. So that's what makes up the difference. Not a great puck handler, decent, pretty good shooter, and a pretty good playmaker, but nothing that you look at when you watch him play. You don't think he's an 80 to 100 point player, and then you look at his stats. You're like, wait, what's going on? Peel back the layers, and then you start seeing, oh, okay, it's this kid's very, very, very gifted at interpreting the game in a very unique way. And so, yeah, more complimentary. Definitely has top six potential upside if things go right, and he's one of the younger players in the draft. Still, he's not that old either. So there's a lot of, and this was his first year playing the dub. So to say that he had one heck of a rookie season in the dub, it's a severe understatement. So you take that into consideration with the age and the fact that can the skating come another notch? And if that's the case, can he actually drive position a little bit more than we see now? And can he enter a neutral zone while carrying the puck a little bit more than we see now? That's probably yes. So that will help his cause too. So interesting player. Mark definitely had him the highest on our list. There was some debate here. I would argue that he was one of the most debated players in terms of where we should ultimately rank him. But Mark's a huge fan of his, and hopefully he hits for us.
Yeah. So you talk about like his play away from the puck. I would argue he's probably one of the best penalty killer in this draft. That's that was my first viewing of him this year. Like it was a viewing where he didn't do a whole lot offensively, but man, defensively, his reads, the way he played on the PK, his stick, like really impressive player on short-handed. And again, that's another layers to his game where the more layers you have, the better your chances are going to be for you to reach the NHL and play for a long time. Number 19, someone who is really very popular in the online discourse is Cole Eiserman. So that's a guy obviously that drew up for us. If you look at our first ranking of the year, so it's it's kind of silly to say this, but he had a tough year, even though he broke Cole Scofield, record for number of goals with the U.S. national program. The problem with Cole this year was I don't think he really progressed from last year. I think there was a lot of inconsistency from him. Obviously, the shot is there. The shot will always be there. Elite shot, best shot in the draft. He can score goals. That's what he does. It's more like the rest. Like what can he do else? Elsewhere to bring value to his team. Some might argue like, well, goal scoring, that's the toughest thing to do. Why are you complaining? And it's like, it's true, but even look at Cole Caulfield. Like, he was a gifted scorer, obviously. But in the NHL, he has had to learn how to play away from the puck. He has had to learn to compete better. And he has done this let's say this past season with Montreal. Marty St. Louis done a really good job with him. But we saw more the overall game of Caulfield was better at the same age that what we saw from Eiserman this year. So let's talk about the playmaking. The playmaking sometimes was inexistent. There was no playmaking value out of him. And then another game, I remember the Five Nation tournament in February. I thought this was the best showing by him as far as playmaking goes, but overall during the season, it was really to me a letdown how much he didn't make player around him better. I think he's very fixated on shooting the puck, scoring goals. If he doesn't score goals, I don't feel like he can have a good game. So that's one thing I want to see more of him. Play more of a team game. The skating also is a bit of a not a concern, but it's average to above average for us. And other than that, I think the compete level is also something we want to see him get better at. And the consistency in his game also is also a huge issue for us. That's why he's 19 on our list. I think for us, we respect the goal scoring, but we need to see more out of the rest of his game, and we have not seen that so far this year at all. So it might be a ranking we regret in 4 or 5 years, or it might be also a ranking that we might tell ourselves, well, we wish we dropped him lower than that. So toughest guy to rank, honestly, maybe not to rank, but to scout this year, because the goal scoring value is right there, but there's a lot of things that he did that we just didn't like this year. So, Brad, what was your take? Because to me, he was one of the tougher guy to scout this year.
So the big thing with Cole Eiserman is that Jérôme mentioned. So if you're going to be an elite sniper, being a dual threat is incredibly important for most of them. Cole Caulfield was ahead of him in his playmaking at the same age. Cole Caulfield was a better skater mechanically at the same age. Cole Eiserman's bigger. Cole Eiserman projects to be better on a forecheck than Caulfield for sure. But when it comes to the rest of his game, the way he works is essentially in a vacuum. So when he's crossing a line, very gifted snipers are theoretically they're thinking about how to set up their shot off of their teammates, not just through themselves. Right? Cole Eiserman really largely sets up through himself without taking his teammates into consideration. That's one of the biggest differences. It's not as like one-sided as say Yegor Surin, where Igor Surin hits a line, he's just thinking one-on-one, how do I break down this first layer? Eiserman will blitz through the high slot, find a trailing option, and then look to set up the shot off of that. Don't get me wrong, he can make those types of simplified plays. However, when it comes to advanced giving go sequences, that's where he really struggles. When it comes to interpreting those second, third option plays where they're trailing options and he needs to respond. He can't do that very well. So there is a lack of hockey sense on top of a lack of skating base, on top of a lack of growth curve, on top of a player who just quote unquote doesn't really get it when it comes to good defense creating good offense. He cherry picks a lot. He looks to float often. He looks to really pick his spots where he's actually willing to engage and use his gas tank, and that's a problem. It's one of those things that was never corrected. So, despite these concerns, yes, he's the most gifted shooter in the class. It's all to do with his ability to suddenly change his shooting angle. He's remarkable at doing. His hand speed is phenomenal. His hands are extremely impressive. A there's flashes of a dual threat here because he can set up high danger passing plays and make things happen occasionally. It's just, as Jérôme mentioned, very inconsistent. We'd have him way lower than this, even, to be honest with you, if he wasn't as young as he is. And admittedly, if he wasn't in the spotlight he's in. We've seen this happen before. Jérôme, I remember Aatu Räty, player that you were the first to really look at and be like, this kid's overrated. There's something's wrong here because he's not what people are projecting. Sure enough, we put him a lot lower. It looks like to be the right decisions right now. And one thing that Aatu Räty mentioned his draft season was that he had difficulty with the pressure that was generated through social media. It's really tricky for a kid who's 17, 18 years of age to handle the pressure. Cole Eiserman might be in that situation. Maybe that's part of it. But either way, when you take away the hype, you take away what admittedly is just not a good draft position for him heading into the season, where people thought he was number 2, maybe number 1. Like people thought he was going to be competing with Celebrini. We never thought that. That's simply not the case. It was just, to me, it's just misassessment. So, he might be a 40 goal scorer, but the reason we have him this low is simply because you have to take way more variables into consideration than you typically want. You have to take way more risk into consideration. I know for some of you are thinking, well, you just want to look different, or this is way too low. You're overthinking things. It's over-evaluation. We heard all the same things about Arthur Kaliyev. Everybody told us Arthur Kaliyev we had way too low, and the Kaliyev, 50 goal scorer looked unbelievable. They'll fix the skating, yada. The truth is Arthur Kaliev's probably on his way out. Arthur Kaliyev has not really worked out and panned out, played very well professionally. Oliver Wahlstrom is a player that burned us. Oliver Wahlstrom has not worked out. Oliver Wahlstrom has a whole lot of qualities that Eiserman has, and we had to take that into consideration. It's one of the reasons he's as low as he is on our list.
Yeah. At number 18, we got Igor Chernyshov from Russia, a player that is really easy to like, Brad. Good size winger, plays hard, plays like I want to say like a power forward, like a new age power forward. Drives the net hard. Like we just talked about Eiserman, who has like the elite shot, but elsewhere doesn't have a much value elsewhere in his game. Chernyshov is almost like the exact opposite. He has value everywhere, except he's just not like an elite finisher. So if we thought he was a better finisher, like he would be closer to our top 10 than, because there's not much wrong with his game, except we're a bit undecided. Like, is he going to be a 30 goal guy or he's more of a 15 goal guy? We don't know yet. Like he played well in junior this year, got the call up to play in the KHL with Dynamo Moscow. Played with one of our favorite prospects, Dmitry Rashevsky, this past season, who's one of the more underrated prospects you will find in. So anyway, Chernyshov, a lot to like. The skating, size, compete. His play away from the puck is really underrated. He's a good playmaker. The scoring, like the finishing ability, or just what we're questioning. Like, if we're like convinced he's a 30 goal guy, like you would see his name in our top 10, like pretty easily, I think. But that's a bit of the slight concern we have. So that's why he's 18 and not 8 on our list. Brad, I know you're his biggest fan, I think. So tell our viewers or listeners what's your take on Igor Chernyshov.
Yeah, so let's do a little bit of a comparison, maybe relative to Vanacker and Surin. So we mentioned the Russian factor. When you look at Russian forwards that are like the guy in their system, obviously Loco for Surin and Dynamo for Chernyshov. The big difference with Chernyshov is that this player plays already a pro style game. That's incredibly rare in the MHL hockey. In the MHL, it's really just almost like J20 when it comes to Swedish junior hockey, where you have the top skill guys who are just so much more talented than most of the other players, and they're just out there experimenting. They're one man shows. They're doing whatever they want, and it's very difficult to gauge exactly how they're going to look when they're fit into a structured environment. With Chernyshov, from the get go, from moment one, you saw an immediate pro player. He just understood how to play the game the right way. 200-foot player, and one thing with him relative to Surin is that he doesn't see red. He doesn't have tunnel vision. He opens up the ice for his teammates, and he knows how to take advantage of his play on his backhand. That's extremely important because he is a power forward. And when he's trying to drive on his backhand and cut directly into the net, it gives him more options. It gives him more availability in terms of setting up plays within his backhand playmaking. And so it gets very intelligent. So when he's driving down on his proper wing with the puck, or he's driving down on his off wing, there's just way more options for him than you would typically see with most other power forwards. The other thing I'll say about his playmaking is that unlike Vanacker's that we mentioned was more experimental and sometimes too high risk, this player doesn't have that style of game, and it's one of the reasons that he actually managed to progress to the KHL. So he ended up playing the KHL for the majority of the season. The other factor that you have to take into consideration is that we think that there's another gear to him. He is a bit heavy set, and sometimes his first 2-3 steps within his stride, his acceleration out of the gate is a bit slower than you typically want. But then when he gets going, he's fine, and mechanically he's fine. He'll be okay. But we think there's no impingement, there's no direct skating mechanics that you go, oh no, this might be something that really stops him or holds him back, like it does in Beaudoin's case or Carter Yakinchuk we'll get to with their hip issues. This player is not like that. This player is more, he's just more heavy set. Let's get him conditioned, lean him out, and he'll get quicker. So plays on the penalty kill Dynamo. He played more than 30 games in the KHL. Tremendous structure, 200-foot game, exceptionally gifted power playmaker in some ways. As Jérôme mentioned, the one the trait that you would rank a bit lower is the finishing rates. He scored one of the best goals we saw this season. I remember Jérôme watched what an amazing goal where he went through 5 different players on his way to the net and roofed it in tight. But it's one of those situations where, although he won't be the best scorer you ever see, probably a 20 goal scorer, the playmaking rates. For me, I think he could be one of those 60-point, 20 and 40 guys. So power play one upside, penalty killing potential. He's also a line driver, and he projects to play weighted minutes, much like Yegor Surin. So there's driving instincts, but he also, it's very tricky and rare to see a player understand when to actually incorporate his teammates at the stage of development at the right times within the systems that he's in, and he did that. That speaks volumes to hockey sense, speaks volumes to his maturity, and he can do everything. He can out finesse you on one play, and then he'll outpower you on the next. And that's the type of variation that we really look for at the top of the class.
Yeah, an interesting player to follow on draft day where he goes. I think he might be all over the map. Kind of like reminds me a bit of Daniel Yurov in his draft year, like a guy believe we had in 10th, and he went, I believe, 22nd, maybe, to Minnesota. So very similar situation between Yurov and Chernyshov. Okay. At number 17, we have Adam Jiricek out of Czechia. Unfortunately for him, he's a player who missed all of the second half of the season, got hurt at the U20 tournament in December. And funny enough, similar to his brother David, both got hurt game 1 at the World Junior in their draft year. But David was able to come back to play at the World Championship just before his draft year. Adam couldn't come back for the U18 in April, unfortunately for him. But he's a player that we really like early on. But last year, he made really a good impression on us at the U18 last season, and had a really good Elinka tournament in August. Unfortunately, like, he was playing in the Czech league, really tough league physically for any 17 years old to play in, and it showed a bit with his adaptation to that league, his success, obviously. It was really challenging for him. So maybe looking back, maybe that's a guy that maybe should have come play in the CHL. He was drafted by Brentford in the OHL. So he could have played with a guy like Marek Vanacker this season. Maybe that would have been a better um, option for him. But we can say he struggled in that league. But honestly, I don't think it was as bad as I think some people, make it to be. Like it's a really strong league, physically. To me, the most physical league in Europe is the Czech league. So it's tough for any teenager to play in that league, and it was tough for Jiricek. But I think a few things about him. We love we love his tenacity. He's a bit of a old school, gritty defenseman, tough to play against. Uh, One thing maybe we overvalue last year was maybe the skating. Maybe the skating is not as good as we, thought last year. Um, his skating was a bit average when he played against men's. When he played against junior, it was obviously looking a bit better. So it does. It's not like it's a big red flag for him, but it's probably as far as like a rating goes for us, we had to downgrade his skating rating a bit, and that hurt a bit his projection. Um, and there's a lot of things we don't have answered because he didn't play a single game since December 26th, basically. So you know, we didn't see if the skating improved. We didn't see what about his shooting skills. Like that's one thing we noticed really early on is that he's really good. Like even at the Olympia tournament when he played well. The shooting was not there. Like on the power play, he was not dangerous from the point because he couldn't shoot the puck like at a high level. So we didn't see that in the second half of the season. We don't know if he could have made adjustment, could make improvement to his shot. We don't know that. So there's a lot of I guess missing data I think from him, but we saw enough last year. We saw enough in the first half that we feel confident he's a top four defenseman upside wise. Um, Obviously the injury. Anytime a player's hurt his knee, it's always a bit of a you know. Well, looks like he's making a complete recovery and will be ready for next season. But I just mentioned Cole Eiserman as a tough player to scout this year. Jiricek's another tough player to scout, but for a different reason. The reason why he didn't well, one is he didn't play in the second half of the season, and his first half was not like all that impressive. So it's a bit of it's a tough one here because like I said, we don't there's some data from him that is missing. But upside wise, we like the way he plays. Um, Lots of tenacity, tough to play against. He can skate well enough. He's not a great skater like maybe we thought he was, but he skates well enough and can move pucks. The power play value, then it's probably more of a PP2 value now than a PP1. Unless the shot improves, but we don't have an answer for that right now. So I think we go projection wise a bit more safe with you know second pairing defenseman um, and maybe not a PP1 value for him. Brad, what was your take? Because he's obviously a really tough one to figure it out because of the average season he had and also the injury.
Yeah, so the big thing with him is in a draft where you're looking at top end defensemen, the top six, seven, eight defensemen. Most of them have a lot of specialization with elite traits. He's the opposite of that. He's more of a well-rounded defenseman who's not so great in any one thing. And that's not a bad thing. Sometimes you need a 6'2", 6'3", well-rounded defenseman that can play in your top four, and that's what really he projects to be. To Jerome's point, like the skating is average to below average, depending on the mechanic. And so when you blow out an knee or get a severe ear injury, that obviously really matters. He does not project to be as gifted as his brother offensively, but theoretically, defensively, he should be around that range. So yeah, not it won't be going nearly as high as his brother did, and doesn't project to be what his brother projects to be. But that doesn't mean he's not a good player in his own right. And yeah, very good, very useful, well-rounded, somewhat intelligent defenseman who can do a bit of everything, chip in a different number of ways, which is valuable to any team.
All right, that will wrap up part one of our top 32 ranking show. We're going to be back with our top 16. So check our YouTube channel. We're going to be back pretty soon with our breakdown of the top 16. Thanks for watching. Also, if you can give us a thumbs up for the video, we would appreciate it. And we'll talk to you guys soon.